Good evening. This is Wavecast Radio. We are interrupting our regular programming to bring you breaking news of an unprecedented global crisis. Within the last 4 hours, we have received confirmed reports of simultaneous security failures at correctional facilities across every inhabited continent. I want to be very clear with our listeners. What we are witnessing is not a coordinated attack, not a terrorist operation, but rather a catastrophic systems collapse affecting prison infrastructure worldwide. The scope is staggering. Initial reports indicate that approximately 2,300 correctional facilities in 78 countries have experienced complete containment breaches. We are talking about an estimated 4.2 million individuals who were incarcerated as of 6 hours ago and are no longer within secure custody. Let me walk you through what we know at this moment. The first confirmed breach occurred at Quezon City Jail in Manila, Philippines at approximately 1400 hours Greenwich Mean Time. Within minutes, similar reports emerged from Tokyo, Sydney, Singapore, and Jakarta. The pattern spread westward with alarming speed. By 1500 hours, facilities across the Indian subcontinent were reporting failures. Pakistan's Central Jail Karachi, India's Tihar complex in New Delhi, and Bangladesh's Dhaka Central Jail all experienced simultaneous electronic lock malfunctions. The timeline suggests this is not human coordination, but rather a fundamental flaw in a widely distributed security system that was activated or exploited at a precise moment. European facilities began reporting at approximately 1600 hours. I have confirmation that Fleury-Mérogis in France, the largest prison in Europe, housing nearly 4,000 inmates, has been completely evacuated by its population. Authorities report that perimeter fences were somehow depowered, electronic gates opened autonomously, and backup systems failed to engage. Similar scenarios unfolded at Belmarsh in London, Scheveningen in the Netherlands, and the Justizenstalt Graz-Karlau in Austria. German officials report that all 31 facilities in the Bundesland system experienced the same electronic failure within a 12-minute window. The numbers from the European Union alone indicate approximately 380,000 individuals are no longer in custody. The situation in the Americas became critical approximately 90 minutes ago. Let me give you specific data points. Rikers Island in New York City reported a complete systems failure at 1700 hours local time. All 10 jails on that complex, housing approximately 5,000 individuals, experienced simultaneous gate openings. Correction officers report that despite attempting manual lockdown protocols, electromagnetic systems that should have remained analog were somehow compromised. Cook County Jail in Chicago, the largest single-site jail in the United States with a population of approximately 6,000, reported identical failures 3 minutes later. Los Angeles County facilities, San Quentin in California, and Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola all confirmed breaches within the following 20 minutes. Federal Bureau of Prisons facilities across the United States reported system failures at nearly identical timestamps. A DX Florence in Colorado, the nation's only Supermax facility housing the most dangerous offenders, confirmed a breach 47 minutes ago. Officials there report that despite the facility's reputation as escape-proof, the automated systems controlling everything from cell doors to perimeter barriers simply deactivated. Early estimates suggest that of the approximately 2.3 million people incarcerated in the United States as of this morning, at least 1.8 million are no longer in secure detention. That represents a 78% breach rate. Canadian facilities from the Atlantic to Pacific provinces report similar failures. Latin American nations are reporting catastrophic numbers. Mexico's entire federal penitentiary system, which housed approximately 220,000 individuals, has experienced near-total population dispersal. Authorities in Mexico City report that the Federal Social Readaptation Center No. 1, known as Altiplano, which held high-profile cartel leaders under maximum security conditions, is now empty. Brazilian officials confirmed that facilities in São Paulo, Rio de Janeiro, and Brasilia have all been compromised. The Complexo Penitenciário da Papuda, one of Brazil's largest facilities, is reporting that its population of approximately 17,000 has completely dispersed into the surrounding areas. Let me provide context on what this means practically. We are receiving reports from municipalities worldwide of infrastructure strain that is unlike anything in modern history. Police departments in major metropolitan areas are operating under crisis protocols. I have confirmation that the New York Police Department has recalled all off-duty officers and has established a command center in Lower Manhattan. They are prioritizing violent offenders and focusing resources on protecting critical infrastructure, hospitals, schools, and government buildings. Chicago PD reports similar measures. Los Angeles has declared a citywide emergency. The mayor there announced 37 minutes ago that residents should shelter in place until further notice. European capitals are experiencing comparable situations. London's Metropolitan Police report that all available units are on the streets. They are working from prioritized lists, focusing first on individuals who were serving sentences for violent offenses, terrorism-related convictions, and organized crime leadership. The challenge they face is mathematical. With approximately 43,000 individuals who were in custody in Greater London facilities now dispersed, and approximately 31,000 Metropolitan Police officers, the ratios are simply unmanageable. Paris is reporting similar numbers. The French National Police have established a coordination center and are working with Interpol to track individuals across borders. But early indications suggest that thousands have already left the greater Paris region. I want to address what many listeners are undoubtedly thinking. How did this happen? We have been in contact with security infrastructure experts, and what they are telling us paints a troubling picture. Approximately 68% of correctional facilities worldwide have upgraded their security systems within the last 8 years to integrated electronic management platforms. These systems control everything from individual cell locks to perimeter barriers, from internal surveillance to communication networks. 3 major corporations provide the majority of these systems globally. The leading theory at this moment is that a fundamental vulnerability in the core architecture of these platforms was either discovered and exploited, or a cascading failure in the authentication systems caused a global reset to what engineers call a fail-safe open state. To put that in simpler terms, these systems are designed so that in the event of catastrophic power failure or system collapse, doors unlock rather than remaining sealed. The reasoning is humanitarian. If there is a fire, an earthquake, or another life-threatening emergency, the priority is preventing loss of life over maintaining security. What appears to have happened is that this fail-safe mechanism was triggered simultaneously across facilities on every continent. Whether this was intentional sabotage, a software update gone catastrophically wrong, or a cyber attack is still under investigation. What we know is the result: the largest mass release of incarcerated individuals in human history. The casualties are mounting, and I need to be direct with our listeners about what we are seeing. In the immediate aftermath of these breaches, overcrowding and panic resulted in deaths at multiple facilities. Jakarta authorities report that at least 73 people were killed in the crush as populations tried to exit Cipinang Penitentiary simultaneously through compromised gates. Similar reports from Karachi indicate 41 confirmed deaths from crowd compression and trampling. These are not the only casualties. We are receiving reports of violence in the immediate areas surrounding facilities as released populations encounter law enforcement attempting to re-establish containment. Manila police report that in the neighborhoods surrounding New Bilibid prison, at least 27 people have been killed in confrontations. That facility housed approximately 28,000 individuals before the breach, many serving sentences for violent crimes. The Philippine National Police have established a perimeter approximately 3 kilometers from the facility, but reports indicate that the majority of the population dispersed before that perimeter could be effectively established. Tokyo is reporting 18 confirmed civilian casualties in areas near the Tokyo Detention House. Australian authorities report that in the areas surrounding Port Phillip Prison in Melbourne, at least 12 people have been killed in what they are describing as opportunistic violence. European casualty numbers are rising. French authorities now report 63 deaths in the Greater Paris region in the 3 hours since the initial breach. German federal police report 41 confirmed deaths across multiple states. The United Kingdom is reporting a current total of 57 fatalities, primarily in London, Manchester, and Birmingham. Italian officials report that in Rome alone, there have been 33 confirmed deaths. Spanish authorities report 29 in Madrid and another 18 in Barcelona. These are confirmed numbers. The actual toll is almost certainly higher, as emergency services are overwhelmed, and many incidents have not yet been fully documented. The situation in the Americas is producing similarly grim statistics. New York City officials report that in the 4 boroughs closest to Rikers Island, there have been 41 confirmed deaths in the last 90 minutes. Chicago is reporting 33. Los Angeles County has confirmed 27 deaths, though officials there acknowledge that number is likely to increase significantly as reports are consolidated. Smaller cities are facing proportional crises. Philadelphia is reporting 19 deaths. Houston reports 16. Atlanta, 13. These numbers represent only what has been confirmed by medical examiners or emergency personnel. The real toll is unknown. Latin American numbers are devastating. Mexican authorities report that in Mexico City alone, there have been at least 117 confirmed deaths in the 2 hours since the initial breach. Guadalajara reports 43. Monterrey, 31. Brazilian officials report that in Sao Paulo, the death toll has reached 153. Rio de Janeiro reports 87. These numbers include both casualties from the initial breaches and violence in surrounding communities. In several cases, we are hearing reports of released populations settling scores, of retribution against witnesses or informants, of gang violence spilling immediately into civilian areas. Infrastructure is collapsing in predictable patterns. Power grids in major cities are experiencing unprecedented strain. Con Edison in New York reports that demand has spiked beyond capacity in 3 boroughs as residents shelter indoors with all lights and security systems activated. They have implemented rolling blackouts to prevent complete grid failure. Similar situations are unfolding in Chicago, Los Angeles, and Houston. European cities are experiencing the same phenomenon. London's national grid has announced that power rationing may be necessary. Paris has already implemented selective blackouts in outer arrondissements. Berlin's grid operators report that the system is at 97% capacity, and any additional strain could result in cascading failures. Transportation systems are shutting down. The New York Metropolitan Transportation Authority has suspended all subway service indefinitely. Buses are running on limited routes only. Chicago's CTA has implemented emergency protocols. The London Underground has closed all lines until further notice. Paris Metro is operating on a severely reduced schedule with armed police at every station. Tokyo's normally pristine transit system has suspended service on 17 lines. These shutdowns are both precautionary and necessary. Reports indicate that released populations are using public transportation to disperse from facility. Locations and authorities are attempting to limit mobility while maintaining emergency services access. Hospitals are overwhelmed. I have spoken with administrators at major medical centers, and what they describe is dire. Bellevue Hospital in Manhattan reports that their emergency department is operating at 230% capacity. They have set up triage in the parking structure. Cook County Hospital in Chicago reports similar numbers. They are treating injuries from the initial crowd crushes, from violence in surrounding neighborhoods, and from accidents as civilian traffic attempts to flee affected areas. Cedars-Sinai in Los Angeles has activated its mass casualty protocol. London's St. Thomas's Hospital reports that every available bed is occupied, and they are treating overflow patients in corridors. The global death toll, based on confirmed reports from government sources, now stands at 1,247. That number has increased by over 300 in the last 45 minutes. Projections from emergency management officials suggest that if the current trajectory continues, we could see casualties in the 5-figure range within 24 hours. These projections account for ongoing violence, medical emergencies that cannot be treated due to overwhelmed healthcare systems, and potential infrastructure failures that could result in additional mass casualty events. Let me address the response from national governments. The President of the United States addressed the nation 23 minutes ago. The statement was brief, and I will summarize the key points. A national emergency has been declared. The National Guard has been activated in all 50 states. The President has authorized the deployment of active-duty military personnel to support civilian law enforcement in major metropolitan areas. The statement emphasized that the priority is public safety and the restoration of order, and that due process would be followed for individuals who are apprehended. The statement concluded with a directive that residents should remain indoors, avoid unnecessary travel, and report any suspicious activity to local authorities. The European Union has convened an emergency session. The President of the European Commission has announced the activation of the EU Civil Protection Mechanism. Member states are coordinating response efforts. Border controls have been temporarily reinstated across the Schengen area. This is significant. For the first time since the migration crisis, internal EU borders are being actively monitored and controlled. The stated purpose is to prevent the free movement of individuals who were incarcerated for serious offenses. Interpol has issued what they are calling a global priority notice, essentially a watch list of approximately 73,000 individuals who were serving sentences for terrorism, organized crime leadership, human trafficking, and other offenses deemed to pose extreme public risk. Asian governments are implementing varying strategies. Japan has declared a state of emergency in Tokyo, Osaka, and 3 other prefectures. The self-defense forces have been deployed to support police operations. Prime Minister's office has announced that approximately 12,000 personnel will be on the streets by midnight local time. South Korea has implemented similar measures. China's response has been, as expected, less transparent. But reports indicate massive deployment of People's Armed Police in Beijing, Shanghai, and Guangzhou. India has activated the Central Reserve Police Force across multiple states. The numbers there are particularly challenging. With approximately 478,000 individuals who were incarcerated as of this morning, and breach rates similar to global averages, Indian authorities are facing approximately 370,000 individuals to account for across a nation of 1.4 billion people. Australia has declared a national emergency. The Australian Defence Force has been activated. New Zealand is implementing similar protocols despite having far smaller affected populations. In both countries, the challenge is geographic. With populations concentrated in a few urban centers and vast rural areas, the concern is that individuals will disperse into regions where law enforcement presence is minimal and tracking becomes nearly impossible. Latin American responses vary significantly. Mexico has deployed the military to major cities. The president announced that approximately 35,000 troops will support police operations. Brazil has activated military police across all states. The challenge there is that many facilities were already operating under crisis conditions before this event. Overcrowding, gang control of certain blocks, and corruption had already compromised security. In some cases, reports indicate that prison populations did not flee, but rather fortified their positions, creating what amount to armed compounds in urban areas. Venezuelan authorities have provided no official statement, but reports from Caracas indicate complete chaos in areas surrounding El Helicoide and other facilities. African nations are reporting mixed situations. South Africa has declared a state of emergency. Police and military forces are deployed in Johannesburg, Cape Town, and Durban. Nigeria reports breaches at facilities in Lagos, Abuja, and Port Harcourt. The challenge across the African continent is that many nations were already facing capacity constraints in law enforcement and correctional systems. Kenya, Tanzania, Uganda, and Ethiopia are all reporting facility breaches, but have provided limited information on response protocols or casualty numbers. North African nations including Egypt, Algeria, and Morocco have confirmed breaches, but have been less forthcoming with specific data. Middle Eastern responses are being shaped by existing security concerns. Saudi Arabia has deployed National Guard forces to Riyadh and Jeddah. The United Arab Emirates has activated military support for police in Dubai and Abu Dhabi. Turkey reports breaches at facilities in Istanbul, Ankara, and Izmir, and has deployed military police to those cities. Iran has provided minimal information, but reports from Tehran indicate significant security force presence in the capital. Israel has activated reserve forces and has established security perimeters around major population centers. The concern there is that in addition to criminal populations, individuals who were incarcerated for security-related offenses may pose immediate threats. I want to talk about what is happening on the ground in specific locations, because the data only tells part of the story. I have been in contact with residents in affected areas, and what they describe is a society attempting to process an impossible situation. In Queens, New York, a neighborhood approximately 4 kilometers from Rikers Island, residents have organized watch groups. They are coordinating via social media and neighborhood apps. People who have never met are working together to secure their blocks, to check on elderly neighbors, to ensure children are safe indoors. One resident described seeing groups of released individuals moving through the streets in the first hour after the breach, some running, some walking calmly, some appearing confused or disoriented. Police presence in that neighborhood has been minimal, and residents report they feel abandoned. Similar accounts from Chicago's South Side describe residents taking security into their own hands. Community organizations that work on violence prevention and intervention have mobilized volunteers. They are attempting to provide alternatives to police response, recognizing that many individuals being released may be from their own communities. It is a complicated situation. These are not all violent offenders. Many were serving sentences for nonviolent drug offenses, for property crimes, for immigration violations. The blanket response of treating every released individual as a threat creates its own problems, and community leaders in affected neighborhoods are trying to navigate between security and humanity. In Los Angeles, reports from areas near the Twin Towers Correctional Facility describe gridlocked traffic as residents attempt to evacuate. The highways leading out of the downtown area are at complete standstill. People have abandoned vehicles. There are reports of accidents, of confrontations between drivers, of individuals attempting to flee on foot. One witness described seeing families with children walking along the shoulder of the interstate, carrying what belongings they could, simply trying to get away from the city center. The LAPD has announced that they cannot guarantee response times in many areas and have encouraged residents to shelter in place. But the message is not reaching everyone or is being disregarded. European cities are experiencing similar social fracturing. In Paris, reports from the 18th arrondissement describe neighborhoods essentially shutting down. Businesses have closed. Metro stations are locked. Streets that would normally be crowded are empty except for police patrols. Residents who spoke with our correspondents describe a sense of disbelief, an inability to process what is happening. One woman described standing at her window, watching police vehicles race past, dozens of them, an endless stream, and simply not believing that this was real, that this was happening in Paris, in a modern European capital. London reports that in areas of East London near Belmarsh, residents have barricaded themselves indoors. The Metropolitan Police have established checkpoints on major roads. Witnesses describe seeing armored vehicles, riot police in full gear, helicopters overhead. One resident described the scene as martial, law in everything but name. Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool are reporting similar atmospheres. The United Kingdom, which has not faced this kind of domestic security crisis in modern history, is struggling to adapt. German cities are implementing systematic responses. In Berlin, police have divided the city into sectors and are implementing zone-by-zone sweeps. The approach is methodical, coordinated, and resource-intensive. Frankfurt, Munich, and Hamburg are using similar protocols. The German efficiency is evident, but even with significant police resources, the numbers are overwhelming. One officer in Berlin described the situation as attempting to find specific individuals in a city of millions when those individuals have every incentive to blend in, to disappear, to avoid detection. Italian cities are experiencing more chaotic responses. Rome, with its complex layout and historical infrastructure, is proving particularly difficult to secure. Police report that individuals are using the ancient underground passages, the catacombs, the complex network of streets and alleys to evade detection. Naples reports similar challenges. Milan, with its more modern infrastructure, is finding the response somewhat more manageable, but only somewhat. Spanish cities are struggling with similar issues. Madrid and Barcelona have significant security force presence on the streets, but witnesses describe an atmosphere of barely controlled panic. Asian cities are implementing responses shaped by their particular governance structures. Tokyo's response has been highly organized. Police and self-defense forces have established clear command structures. The city has been divided into districts with assigned responsibility. Communication to residents has been clear and systematic. Compliance appears high. One observer noted that in a city of nearly 14 million people, the streets are nearly empty. Residents are following directives, and the response is proceeding with characteristic Japanese order. Seoul is implementing similar protocols with comparable results. The situation in China is less transparent, but appears to involve massive security force deployment and extensive surveillance infrastructure. Beijing's vast network of cameras and facial recognition systems are undoubtedly being used to track individuals. The authoritarian response capabilities of the Chinese state mean that the chaos visible in democratic nations is likely being suppressed through overwhelming force. Reports from Shanghai and Guangzhou suggest similar approaches. The human rights implications are concerning, but the effectiveness in terms of re-establishing order may prove significant. India presents a different challenge entirely. Cities like Mumbai, Delhi, and Bangalore are attempting to implement coordinated responses, but the scale is staggering. Mumbai alone has a population of over 20 million people. The number of police officers is insufficient for normal operations, much less a crisis of this magnitude. Reports describe neighborhoods organizing their own security, in some cases along ethnic or religious lines, which creates its own dangers. Delhi reports that certain areas are essentially ungoverned at this moment, that police presence has withdrawn to protect critical infrastructure and government facilities, and that residents are left to their own devices. Southeast Asian cities are experiencing varying degrees of crisis. Manila, where this began, reports ongoing chaos. The Philippine National Police are deployed in force, but the city of over 14 million people is simply too large to secure comprehensively. Jakarta reports similar challenges. Bangkok has implemented extensive security measures and curfews. Singapore, with its smaller size and extensive surveillance infrastructure, appears to have established more effective control, though the human rights implications of their response are being questioned by international observers. Australian cities are implementing responses complicated by geography. Sydney and Melbourne have significant police and military presence on the streets. The population is complying with shelter-in-place directives. However, there are reports that individuals have fled to regional areas, to the outback, to places where tracking them will be nearly impossible with available resources. New Zealand is facing similar challenges on a smaller scale. Latin American cities are experiencing some of the most severe breakdowns of order. Mexico City, one of the world's largest urban areas, is reporting that certain neighborhoods are essentially controlled by released cartel members and gang populations. Police have withdrawn from some areas. Military forces are deployed, but are concentrated in protecting government facilities and wealthier neighborhoods. One reporter in Mexico City described seeing buildings on fire, hearing sustained gunfire, and a complete absence of any official response in certain districts. The class dynamics are stark. Wealthy neighborhoods have private security and military protection. Poor neighborhoods are abandoned. São Paulo and Rio de Janeiro in Brazil are experiencing similar divisions. The favelas, which already had complicated relationships with official authority, are in some cases controlled by returned gang leaders. The police are not entering. Military police are deployed in central business districts and wealthier areas. One analyst described this as the acceleration of existing trends, a crisis that has made visible the failures of governance that were always present, but could be ignored until now. Buenos Aires in Argentina is experiencing a more controlled crisis, but reports still indicate significant violence and breakdown of normal order in some areas. Casualty numbers continue to rise. The confirmed global death toll is now 1,893. That is an increase of over 600 in the last hour. Projections now suggest we will cross 2,000 deaths within the next 30 minutes. The United States accounts for 412 of those confirmed deaths. Europe accounts for 367. Asia accounts for 541, with the Philippines, Indonesia, and India representing the majority. Latin America accounts for 493. Africa accounts for 57 confirmed deaths, though that number is almost certainly a significant undercount, given limited reporting from many nations. The Middle East accounts for 23 confirmed deaths. These numbers do not capture the full scope of the human cost. Hospitals report that patients with chronic conditions are unable to receive care because emergency departments are overwhelmed. There have been multiple reports of individuals suffering heart attacks, strokes, and other medical emergencies who could not access treatment and died. These deaths are indirect casualties of this crisis, but are no less real. Infrastructure failures are also creating casualties. Power outages have disabled medical equipment in some facilities. Traffic gridlock has prevented ambulances from reaching patients. One hospital administrator in Chicago described watching a patient die because the ambulance carrying them was stuck in traffic for over an hour and simply could not reach the facility in time. Economic impacts are beginning to emerge. Global stock markets, which were closed when this crisis began, will open in a few hours in Asian markets. Analysts predict catastrophic losses. The uncertainty alone is sufficient to trigger massive sell-offs. Beyond that, the actual economic damage is incalculable at this point. Major cities are shut down. Commerce has ceased. Supply chains are disrupted. One economist I spoke with estimated that every day this crisis continues costs the global economy approximately $500 billion in lost productivity, damaged infrastructure, and diverted resources. If this extends for a week, we are looking at economic damage comparable to a major war. Transportation infrastructure damage is mounting. Reports indicate that in the rush to evacuate, or in confrontations between security forces and released populations, significant damage has occurred to roads, bridges, and public transit systems. Mexico City reports that 4 metro stations have been damaged by fires. São Paulo reports similar damage to bus terminals. In the United States, there are reports of vehicles being abandoned on highways in such numbers that the roads are impassable. Tow trucks and emergency vehicles cannot navigate. Some highways may need to be cleared by military equipment. Communication infrastructure is being strained to the breaking point. Mobile networks in major cities are experiencing outages or severe degradation. The volume of calls, texts, and data usage as millions of people attempt to reach loved ones, coordinate responses, or simply get information has overwhelmed capacity. Internet service providers report similar strain. Some areas are experiencing complete blackouts of mobile service. This creates additional problems for emergency response coordination and for residents attempting to stay informed. Water and sanitation systems in some cities are beginning to fail. Power outages affecting pumping stations mean that water pressure is dropping or being lost entirely in some neighborhoods. Without power for treatment plants, there are concerns about water quality. Sanitation systems dependent on electric pumps are backing up. These are the cascading infrastructure failures that emergency management officials warned about. Each system depends on others. When one fails, it creates additional stress on the rest, and the whole structure becomes increasingly fragile. There are reports emerging of extraordinary courage and humanity in the midst of this chaos. In Detroit, residents of a neighborhood near a correctional facility have opened their homes to people fleeing violence. They have organized a shelter, are providing food and water, and are asking no questions about who needs help. In Madrid, doctors and nurses have set up a field hospital in a park to treat injuries when the formal emergency system became overwhelmed. In Tokyo, volunteers are going door to door in their apartment buildings, checking on elderly residents and people with disabilities to ensure they have food and water. Teachers in Philadelphia have organized to provide childcare for essential workers who cannot stay home. They have set up informal schools in basements and community centers, taking children off the streets and providing some semblance of normalcy. In London, faith communities of different traditions have come together to provide support. Churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples have opened their doors as shelters. They are sharing resources, coordinating with local authorities, and providing spaces where people feel safe. The long-term priority is addressing the fundamental vulnerabilities that allowed this to happen. The over-reliance on electronic systems without adequate redundancy. The concentration of control in a small number of corporate platforms. The failure to maintain manual backup systems. Beyond technical fixes, there are deeper questions about incarceration itself. If a society can lose control of millions of incarcerated people in a matter of hours, what does that say about the system? If communities must suddenly account for released populations, what does that reveal about how those populations were removed from communities in the first place. Some analysts are describing this as a moment of reckoning. The United States incarcerates a higher percentage of its population than any other nation. The global trend toward mass incarceration over the past 4 decades has created enormous institutional infrastructure that, as we now see, is fragile. The question being posed by some is whether this crisis creates an opportunity to fundamentally rethink approaches to crime, punishment, and public safety. Others argue that this crisis demonstrates exactly why incarceration is necessary, that the breakdown of order in the absence of containment shows how essential the system is. European nations are leveraging their mutual defense and cooperation frameworks. The European Gendarmerie Force, typically deployed to international crisis zones, is being used domestically for the first time. French Gendarmerie, Italian Carabinieri, Spanish Guardia Civil, and other paramilitary police forces are being coordinated through EU mechanisms. Border security is being maintained, while also allowing for mutual aid. German police units are supporting operations in Poland. French units are supporting Belgium. The solidarity mechanisms that were built for external threats are being adapted for internal security. Asian responses continue to vary based on governmental structures. Authoritarian states are demonstrating the efficiency of overwhelming force applied without concern for civil liberties. Democratic states are attempting to balance security with rights and are finding the balance difficult to maintain. Japan's systematic approach continues to show results. South Korea is making progress. India's response remains complicated by scale and capacity limitations. Southeast Asian nations are requesting international assistance, and discussions are underway about potential UN peacekeeping or observer missions, which would be unprecedented for domestic security operations, but may be necessary given the scope of the crisis. Latin American nations are experiencing some of the most severe ongoing violence. Mexico has requested United States assistance, and discussions are underway about potential deployment of resources to help stabilize border regions. This is politically sensitive, given historical relationships, but pragmatic. Necessity may override concerns. Brazil is considering a request for Organization of American States support. The situation in Venezuela has deteriorated to the point that neighboring Colombia and Guyana are reinforcing their borders to prevent spillover. African nations are largely managing responses with existing resources, though capacity is limited. International organizations are positioning to provide assistance. The African Union has convened an emergency summit and is discussing coordination mechanisms. Middle Eastern nations are managing their situations, but tensions in the region make any crisis more complex. The concern is that this domestic security crisis could create opportunities for non-state actors, or could escalate existing conflicts. Communities are beginning to organize long-term responses. Neighborhood associations are forming watch programs that will continue beyond the immediate crisis. Mental health professionals are organizing to provide ongoing counseling. Faith communities are coordinating longer-term support networks. These grassroots responses are essential because formal systems will be overwhelmed for an extended period. The resilience of communities, their ability to self-organize and support members, will determine how well society weathers this crisis. There are discussions beginning about what the new normal looks like. It is clear that things will not simply return to how they were. Some changes will be temporary responses to the crisis. Other changes will be permanent. The relationship between citizens and law enforcement will be altered. The trust in technology and automated systems will be questioned. The assumptions about the stability of institutions will be challenged. How society adapts will shape the coming years and possibly decades. Education systems are beginning to plan for how to address this with students. How do you explain to children what happened? How do you help them process fear and uncertainty? How do you maintain their sense that the world is fundamentally safe while being honest about events? Educators and child psychologists are developing curricula and approaches. This crisis will be a defining event for a generation of young people, shaping their understanding of society and institutions. Economic analysts are beginning to model recovery scenarios. The optimistic scenarios suggest that with effective government response and restored order, economic recovery could begin within months. The pessimistic scenarios suggest a prolonged period of contraction, potentially triggering a global recession. Much depends on how quickly confidence is restored. Markets respond to certainty. The longer this situation remains fluid, the more lasting the economic damage will be. In authoritarian systems, the dynamics are different. Leaders may use this crisis to consolidate power, arguing that strong central authority is necessary for security. Dissent may be further suppressed under the guise of emergency powers. The human rights implications are concerning. International observers are already noting that some governments are using this crisis as cover for actions that would not be acceptable under normal circumstances. Let me provide an update on infrastructure restoration efforts. Power companies report that they are making progress in stabilizing grids. Rolling blackouts are being reduced in some areas as demand decreases slightly, with people following conservation guidance. However, several areas still face extended outages, and restoration is complicated by security concerns that prevent repair crews from accessing damaged equipment in some neighborhoods. Water systems in most major cities are functioning, though at reduced capacity in some areas. Boil water advisories have been issued in several municipalities. Sanitation systems are mostly operational, though some areas are experiencing backups. Waste collection has been suspended in many cities due to security concerns, which will create public health issues if not addressed soon. Transportation systems are beginning limited restoration. Some subway lines in New York are reopening with heavy police presence. Bus service is resuming on select routes in several cities. However, highway systems in many areas remain compromised by abandoned vehicles and damage. Clearing operations are underway, but it is slow work. Air travel is operating on severely reduced schedules. Airports are open, but many flights are canceled due to crew shortages, passengers canceling travel, and security concerns. There are philosophical questions here about the nature of social order. Is it maintained primarily through force and the threat of punishment? Or is it maintained through shared values and mutual obligation? This crisis suggests that both are true. When force fails suddenly, as it did here, some social order persists through those shared values. But without the background condition of consequences for violation of norms, the values alone are insufficient for many people. The relationship between coercion and consensus in maintaining social order is being demonstrated in real time. Religious and moral leaders are grappling with these questions. How should society respond to individuals who took advantage of this chaos to harm others? What is justice in a situation where the systems of justice have failed? How do we balance accountability with mercy, especially for those who were incarcerated for minor offenses or who have been changed by their experience? These are ancient questions, but they feel urgent and immediate now. There is also a practical question about capacity. Even if there were perfect clarity about who should be reincarcerated and who should not, the infrastructure to detain millions of people does not currently exist. The facilities are damaged. The staffing is insufficient. The resources are lacking. This means that even if every released individual were apprehended, today there would be nowhere to put them. Some jurisdictions are discussing using military bases or constructing temporary facilities. Others are considering alternative sanctions, electronic monitoring, house arrest, community supervision. The crisis may force experimentation with approaches that have been discussed theoretically, but never implemented at scale. Economic activity is beginning to resume in some areas where security has been established. Businesses are reopening cautiously. Supply chains are beginning to function again, though with significant disruptions. Financial markets, which have been closed or operating on limited schedules, will fully reopen in the coming days. The market response will provide information about investor confidence and economic expectations. Most analysts expect significant losses initially, with the possibility of recovery if the situation stabilizes. Employment impacts are severe. Many businesses closed and may not reopen. Workers who were employed in correctional facilities are without work. The economic sector that has grown around incarceration, from food service to construction to healthcare provision in facilities, has been disrupted. Some workers will transition to other roles, but many will face unemployment. Government agencies responsible for corrections are operating in crisis mode, but their long-term future is uncertain if the correctional infrastructure cannot be rebuilt. Social service agencies are overwhelmed with requests for assistance. People who lost income, who were displaced from homes, who have medical needs, who need mental health support. The demand exceeds capacity by orders of magnitude. Governments are mobilizing resources, but the need is enormous. Charitable organizations are trying to fill gaps, but they too are overwhelmed. The social safety net, already strained in many places, is being tested to the breaking point. Family reunifications are beginning in some cases. People who were incarcerated are returning to families. In some cases, these are joyful reunions. In other cases, they are complicated by the circumstances of the separation, by changes that occurred during incarceration, by the challenges of reintegration. Social workers and counselors are trying to support these reunifications, but resources are limited. Children who are in foster care or state custody due to parental incarceration are in complicated situations. Some parents are attempting to reclaim custody. Child welfare agencies are trying to determine what is in the best interest of children while also managing their own capacity challenges. Some children are being reunited with parents. Others remain in state custody. Some are in legal limbo while determinations are made. Each case is unique. Each requires careful consideration, and the system is overwhelmed. Education systems are beginning to plan for reopening schools. The question is when it will be safe for children to return. Some districts are announcing plans to reopen within days. Others are saying it will be weeks. Parents are divided. Some desperately want schools to reopen so they can return to work. Others are terrified at the idea of children being outside their direct supervision while the situation remains unstable. There is no perfect answer. Universities and colleges are facing similar decisions. Many have students from around the world. International travel is disrupted. Housing is complicated if students are sheltering in place. Remote learning is being considered, but many students lack stable internet access or appropriate study environments. The academic calendar may need to be adjusted. Graduations may be postponed. The ripple effects on higher education will be felt for years. Healthcare systems are beginning to think beyond the immediate trauma response to longer-term public health needs. Routine vaccinations have been disrupted, which could lead to outbreaks of preventable diseases. Chronics. Disease management has been interrupted. Mental health needs are enormous and growing. The healthcare system will need to address both the backlog of deferred care and the ongoing needs created by this crisis, while also returning to normal operations. The global death toll stands at 3,568. The number has increased by only 153 in the last hour, which is the smallest increase we have seen since the crisis began. This suggests we may be past the peak of acute violence. However, the total will continue to rise as indirect casualties are counted and as delayed reports come in. The final toll may approach 5,000. I want to talk about the international implications beyond the immediate crisis response. This event has demonstrated vulnerabilities in global systems. If security infrastructure can fail simultaneously across borders, what other systems might be similarly vulnerable? Financial systems, communications networks, power grids, transportation. The interconnection and standardization that create efficiency also create systemic risk. This crisis is prompting reevaluation of how we balance those trade-offs. Geopolitical relationships are being tested. Nations are requesting assistance from traditional allies, but also from non-traditional partners in some cases. The willingness or unwillingness to provide aid is revealing about relationships. Some nations are using this crisis opportunistically, offering aid with strings attached or demanding concessions. Others are providing assistance genuinely and without conditions. The map of international relations may be redrawn based on how nations behave during this crisis. There are concerns that adversarial nations may seek to exploit this crisis. A society in chaos is vulnerable to external pressure. Whether through cyber attacks, disinformation campaigns, economic manipulation, or even military adventurism, hostile actors may see opportunity. Intelligence agencies are monitoring for signs of such activity. Defensive measures are being taken. The crisis creates both vulnerability and distraction, both of which can be exploited. The crisis is also affecting international negotiations and agreements that were underway before this event. Climate negotiations, trade agreements, security pacts. Some are being postponed as nations focus on domestic concerns. Others are being accelerated as nations seek cooperative frameworks to manage shared challenges. The trajectory of international cooperation may shift based on how this crisis unfolds. Non-state actors are also responding. Terrorist organizations may see this chaos as opportunity. Criminal networks may expand operations while law enforcement is distracted. Human trafficking, drug trafficking, weapons trafficking could all increase. Conversely, some criminal networks have been disrupted by the crisis as imprisoned leaders were released, but infrastructure and operations were scattered. The criminal landscape is being reshaped. Humanitarian organizations are stretched thin. The needs in this crisis compound the needs in existing humanitarian emergencies around the world. Resources are finite. Choices must be made about where to deploy personnel and funding. Some ongoing operations are being reduced to redirect resources to this crisis. Those affected by other emergencies will suffer as a result. The zero-sum nature of humanitarian response in a resource-constrained world is stark. The global death toll is now 3,691. The slowing rate of increase continues, which is cautiously encouraging. However, we must acknowledge that 3,691 people are dead who were alive this morning. Families are grieving. Communities are traumatized. The number will continue to rise, though hopefully not at the pace we saw in the early hours of this crisis. I want to address those who are listening and who are directly affected by this crisis. If you are sheltering in place, afraid, uncertain about what comes next, know that you are not alone. Millions of people around the world are experiencing the same fear and uncertainty. Reach out to neighbors, to friends, to family. Human connection in times of crisis is essential. If you see someone in need, help if you can safely do so. If you need help, ask for it. Communities survive crises through mutual aid and solidarity. The situation continues to evolve. Security forces are making progress in some areas and facing setbacks in others. Infrastructure is being restored in some places and failing in others. Communities are coming together in some locations and fracturing in others. This is the nature of a distributed crisis. There is no single narrative, no uniform experience. Each locality, each community, each individual is navigating this in their own way. Reports indicate that in some areas, released populations and communities are finding ways to coexist. Informal agreements are being reached. People who were incarcerated are being integrated back into communities with conditions and oversight that are locally determined rather than imposed by formal systems. Whether these informal arrangements will hold, whether they can scale, whether they can be formalized into sustainable approaches, remains to be seen. But they represent experiments in alternative justice that may provide lessons. In other areas, the divide between released populations and communities is sharp. Fear and distrust prevent any possibility of reconciliation or integration. These areas face ongoing violence and instability. The presence or absence of pre-existing social capital, of trust, of community cohesion, appears to be a determining factor in outcomes. Communities that had strong networks and relationships before the crisis are better able to manage it. Those that were already fragmented are suffering more. The global death toll has reached 3,743. We appear to be reaching a plateau. The rate of increase over the last 2 hours has been minimal. This suggests that the most acute phase of violence has passed. However, vigilance remains necessary. Secondary crises could still emerge. Infrastructure failures could cause mass casualty events. Renewed violence is possible. The situation is stabilizing, but not yet stable. Economic data is beginning to come in. Preliminary estimates suggest that global GDP contracted by approximately 2% in the last 12 hours. That is an annualized rate of decline that would represent the most severe economic crisis since the Great Depression. However, this may be the floor rather than a continuing trend if stabilization continues. Much depends on how quickly confidence is restored and normal economic activity resumes. Stock markets will begin opening in Asian exchanges within hours. Trading is expected to be volatile. Circuit breakers will likely be triggered. Government officials and central banks have announced they are prepared to intervene to prevent complete collapse. The coordination among global financial authorities is unprecedented. Whether it will be sufficient to prevent panic remains to be seen. The human toll cannot be measured only in deaths and injuries. The psychological trauma of this event will affect millions of people for years. Post-traumatic stress disorder, anxiety, depression, and other mental health conditions will spike. The capacity of mental health systems to respond is limited. Many people will suffer without adequate support. The long-term public health implications are severe. Children who witness or experience trauma during critical developmental periods may face lifelong consequences. Educators and child development experts are warning that we may see effects in academic performance, social development, and mental health for an entire generation. Early intervention can mitigate some of these effects, but resources for intervention are limited. The erosion of trust in institutions will have political and social consequences. If people believe governments cannot protect them, they may turn to other sources of security and authority. This could strengthen community ties and local institutions, which would be positive. But it could also lead to vigilantism, to sectarian division, to the rise of authoritarian movements promising order at the cost of freedom. The trajectory is not predetermined, but will be shaped by the choices made in coming weeks and months. The crisis is forcing conversations that society has avoided, about mass incarceration and whether it serves justice or merely manages poverty and illness, about the role of punishment versus rehabilitation, about who belongs in society and who should be excluded, about the balance between security and freedom, about what we owe to each other as members of a shared community. These conversations are uncomfortable, but they are necessary. Some will emerge from this crisis advocating for more prisons, more police, more security. They will argue that this chaos demonstrates why control and containment are necessary. Others will emerge advocating for less incarceration, for community-based interventions, for addressing root causes of crime rather than symptoms. They will argue that this crisis demonstrates the failures of the current approach. Both perspectives have truth. Both will need to be grappled with. The global death toll is now 3,819. The numbers continue to rise slowly. We are likely to exceed 4,000 before stabilization is complete. Each number is a person. Each had a story, had people who cared about them, had value and dignity. The scale can numb us to the individual tragedies, but we must resist that numbness. These are human beings, not statistics. Infrastructure continues to be restored in a patchwork fashion. Some cities have nearly normal power and water. Others are still experiencing significant outages. Transportation is resuming in some areas. In others, it remains suspended. Communication networks are mostly functional, though strained. The inconsistency creates its own challenges. People in restored areas may not understand why those in affected areas cannot simply return to normal. Supply chains are beginning to function again. Food deliveries to grocery stores are resuming in most areas. Fuel deliveries to gas stations are happening. Medical supplies are being transported to hospitals. The logistics networks that underpin modern society are resilient and are recovering. However, shortages remain in many areas and will take time to fully resolve. The global death toll is now 4,412. The rise continues, but has slowed nearly to a stop. We are likely at or very near the final count from the acute phase of this crisis. 4,412 lives ended today. We remember them. We mourn them. We commit to learning from this tragedy so that their deaths are not meaningless. This is Wavecast Radio. We have been with you throughout this extraordinary and terrible day, bringing you information, trying to make sense of events that defy easy comprehension. We will remain with you as the story continues to unfold, as stabilization progresses, as recovery begins. What has happened today will shape our world for years to come. How we respond, how we rebuild, how we change or fail to change, these will determine our future. To everyone listening, wherever you are, whatever you are facing, take care of each other. Be kind when you can. Be brave when you must. Remember that we are all part of a shared humanity, bound together in this moment of crisis and in whatever comes next. The night ahead may be long and uncertain, but morning will come. We will face it together. This is Wavecast Radio, continuing our coverage of the global correctional facility crisis. Why? We'll keep you informed as events develop. Stay safe, stay connected, and remember that even in the darkest times, hope persists in the actions of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. We carry on.